Hello viewers, welcome to this yet another video class on understanding peasant movements in India. I am Arani Saikia from the Postgraduate Department of History, Nagaon College. We can start this discussion with our previous knowledge on peasant movements. They are the movements of agrarian classes which are related to agriculture in terms of working on land or in terms of both working on land and its ownership. The objective of this video class is to make my students aware of the different categories and dimensions of peasant movements in India. We start with historical overview of the peasant movements. There are various classifications of the peasant movements depending on the period and the issues involved. In India, there are two phases, pre and post independence. The pre independence period movements can be termed as the anti colonial movements as well, since these movements were against the classes which were supporters of the British Empire. They may be the landlords, moneylenders, and other exploiting classes. In order to meet the requirement of the colonial forces and to satisfy their feudal needs, the landlords exploited the tenants, peasants, agricultural laborers, artisans by unreasonable increase in the rent, forced gifts or forced labor, eviction, and even physical torture at times. Commercialization of agriculture, rural indebtedness, and natural calamities like famines and floods added to the problems of the poor agrarian class. The agrarian movements in different parts of the country had roots in the local situation, but it is no denying the fact that they had a bearing on the nationalist movement in India. A thorough study of the tribal and peasant struggles would explore the social movements, response of various sections of the society, nature of leadership, ideology, pattern of mobilization, shifting focus of the movements, as well as the changes in the British policy following the struggles. On the basis of period, the peasant movements in India can be grouped in three time phases. The initial phase from 1857 to 1921 is characterized by the sporadic growth of peasant movements in the absence of proper leadership. The Santal Rebellion of 1855, Maratha Uprising of 1875, Bengal tenant struggles of 1870 to 85, Oath insurrection, Punjab Kisan struggles in the last phase of the 19th century, Champaran Satyagraha, Khera Satyagraha in the early part of the 20th century, and Mopla Rebellion in Malabar in 1921 belong to this phase. The second phase, from 1923 to 1946, is marked by the emergence of the class-conscious peasant organizations. The Kisan Sabha movement in Bihar, Tevaga movement in Bengal 1946-47 and Telangana movement from 1946 to 51 belong to this phase. Post-independence phase witnessed the uninterrupted continuity of the agrarian movements due to the failure of the ruling party to resolve any of the basic problems of the working masses of rural India. In South India, there were agitations known as tenants agitation, such as Kaguru Satyagraha in Karnataka and Uttara Kannada during 1950-70. Six major struggles led by Punjab Kethbari Jamindari Union and the Naxalbari Rebellion in Bengal in 1967 belonged to this phase. Professor A.R. Desai classified the struggles in the colonial period as peasant struggles and those in the post-independent period agrarian struggles. The uses of the term agrarian struggles indicates the presence of a broad coalition consisting of peasants and other classes in these struggles. Desai further subdivided struggles in the post-independence period into two categories. The movements launched by the newly emerged proprietary classes comprising of rich peasants, farmers, viable sections of the middle peasant proprietors and the landlords, and the movements launched by various sections of the agrarian poor in which agrarian proletariat have been acquiring central importance. Kathleen Go, on the basis of a study of 77 agrarian revolts, has roughly classified them into five types in terms of their goals, ideology, and methods of organization. The five important categories of peasant agitations are restorative rebellions, religious movements, social banditry, terrorist vengeance, and mass insurrections. Let's have a detailed look on the categorization of peasant movements. Restorative rebellions is aimed at the restoration of old systems in place of the current system. The Santal tribal agitation against the British is one example of this type of movement. Religious movements. This type of movement is based on the belief that their consolidated efforts would bring about a golden period and a charismatic leader will free them of their misery. Such movements are therefore called as millennium movements or messianic movements. Social banditry. This kind of movements is a type of robbery in which the leaders loot the properties of the rich people and distribute the looted property among the poor. The banditry led by Narasimha Reddy of Kurnool in Andhra Pradesh is one example of this type of movement. Terrorist vengeance is based on violence and armed revolt. Revenge is the sole motive of such peasant movements. Here the agitators make a frontal attack on the opponents with the ideas of meting out collective justice. For example, the Naxalite agitations. Mass insurrections. This type of peasant movement is spontaneous in nature. They are often triggered by dissatisfaction over long pending issues. Initially, dissent is expressed through strikes, non cooperation, shouting slogans, and boycott. Whenever they get a solution, the agitations may come to a sudden end. Deccan Revolt took place in Pune, Ahmednagar, Satara, and Solapur. Then Professor D. N. Dhanagar put the view that peasant movements are important variants of social movements. These movements can be categorized in terms of their ideological orientation, forms of mobilization, and orientation towards change. The peasant movements are therefore classified as radical and institutionalized. A radical peasant movement is viewed as a non institutionalized, large scale collective mobilization initiated and guided by radical ideology for rapid structural change in peasant society. Here, mobilization is initiated for a specific goal and directed against the identified class enemies. They may be the big landowners, police, and administration. It is for far reaching structural change and face opposition by the government authority. On the other hand, an institutionalized peasant movement is one where institutionalized mass mobilization is initiated by recognized bodies for a gradual change in the selected institutional arrangement of society. Here, mobilization is initiated for diversified goals and not always directed against class enemies. It is mostly for structural stability and reformative initiatives within the given structure. It is planned and executed by the political parties in power. But it has been observed that peasant movements are not distinctly radical or reformative. One may be an extension of another through transition over a period of time. The process of mobilization and institutionalization do coexist, and institutionalization provides the new possibilities of mobilization. Indian sociologist Dipankar Gupta argues about two kinds of agrarian movements in India after independence. Those agrarian movements done by the poor agriculture laborers and marginal farmers are known as peasant movements. These agrarian movements are led by political parties such as Kisan Sabha, Communist Party of India, CPIM, CPIML. Those agrarian movements, on the other hand, led by the owners of the land, are known as farmers' movements. These movements are led by political parties such as Bharatiya Kisan Union, which is active in West Uttar Pradesh, Punjab, Haryana, and Setkari Sangathan in Maharashtra, and also Rajya Rayata Sangha in Karnataka. The basic difference between these two groups is that the first group of party works for the poor peasants and the second group of the party works for the landholders. Development economist K.P. Kannan divided the rural labor struggles according to the development of class consciousness. They are protest movements based on caste or religious identity and consciousness, but those which are basically a response generated by the emerging capitalist mode of production. Then secular movements arising from category A that rejects caste identity and consciousness but appealing to the rationality and brotherhood of man, and nationalist movement culminating in radical political consciousness, the seeds of which were in category B, that is, rationality and brotherhood, culminating in class consciousness and class based movements. We can come to our conclusion of this discussion. Classification of the peasant movements is difficult. There are significant overlaps between social movements which makes construction of pure categories difficult. The categories have their limitations. For example, Kathleen Go's documentation of the innumerable peasant revolts during colonial period largely consisted of tribal revolts over land against the British. Ramachandra Guhal's study of the Chipko movement in the 1970s is understood as one of the earliest environmental movements in India, but it also raised concerns of protecting and controlling natural resources for livelihood of peasants in the Uttarakhand region. Thank you viewers for watching this video. We will meet you with yet another class on history of India. Thank you.